Hello, this is Don Panji from LPA Software Solutions. I am welcoming you to today's webinar. Before we jump into the webinar, I'd like to provide you some information about LPA. We are an IBM Analytics and Information Management partner, consulting partner, as well as reseller. We're one of very few platinum analytics partners that IBM has around the world. In fact, we are focused almost 100% on IBM Analytics. We've been around since the early 2000s and have grown up as an application development and business intelligence company. We were one of the original Cognos partners working with Cognos long before IBM acquired them in 2006 and 7. So we have deep expertise in Cognos as well as other of the IBM Analytics tool sets. As you can see, we have multiple clients across the United States in multiple industries. Frankly, we work with companies from 10 people to 50 people, small organizations, helping them with analytics, right up through Fortune 100 big name corporations that everybody has heard of. Our consultants are 100% certified, deep expertise in data warehousing as well as business analytics. Just to show you the breadth of our analytics offerings, this chart here shows that we do strategy work, development to help organizations identify priorities in analytics to move them up the analytics maturity curve. We do data warehousing work, of course, with all of the IBM technologies available, as well as have skills in other technologies like Microsoft SQL Server and so forth. Business intelligence, Cognos Analytics, I already mentioned, we have a long history and excellent skills there. We do quite a bit of training in business intelligence with Cognos. We do it both remotely and on site. And then moving up the curve here, we do planning analytics work around IBM's tool set. Some folks know it as TM1. Planning analytics is the newer name. We have partnership with QUBEdocs, which helps us do detailed performance analysis and documentation of planning analytics TM1 models. And then furthest to the right on this chart here, you can see we have an advanced analytics, cognitive analytics team. We're now doing much work with IBM in their AI areas. As such, we also bring in weather company data, so we can do predictive analytics and AI type projects for you. That's a quick overview of who LPA is and the types of services we offer. Now, I'd like to move on to today's webinar topic. So today we are going to do a webinar with a guest speaker from our partner QUBEdocs. And QUBEdocs essentially allows us to do detailed TM1 or planning analytics model documentation so you can see how data flows through the various cubes. And this will be very helpful for troubleshooting and understanding what's changed if something stops working later and so forth. But without further ado, we'll jump right into the topic and we'll have time for questions at the end. Thank you very much.
And welcome everyone to today's webinar on QUBEdocs Cloud. Just a little housekeeping to get started. I'm going to cover a couple of intro slides and then demo a few parts of the product. We'll get through as many as we can in about 20 to 25 minutes. Then we'll open it up for questions after that. So let's get started. What is QUBEdocs? QUBEdocs is as-built, automated as-built documentation. What does that mean? It means that we basically point QUBEdocs at your TM1 model. We click a button and it automatically reads your entire model the metadata in your model and builds automated diagrams and flowcharts and indexes all of the TI scripts and the rules in your entire model. And I'll demonstrate that as we get into the demo. The documentation is intended to be visual in nature. In other words, you should be able to kind of learn the model as you're looking and using the documentation, clicking through diagrams, seeing side-by-side comparisons, understanding when code has been deleted or added, and really being able to understand changes over time in charts and graphs. So the idea is it's not just textual documentation. The user experience itself, you could imagine there is a lot of information in your TM1 model, and the relationships between all of the objects in your model are very complex. So trying to always maintain the context that you're asking a question or looking at a diagram is important, and we do that, and I'll demonstrate that a little bit in the demo as well. Now, all the diagrams, you can drill through them. We have full model search, which I'll spend a little time on. I'll also show you how we track changes from one snapshot to the next, so we keep track of how your model changes over time. And we have also a log file search and analysis feature that has really gotten a lot of attention the last 6 months or so. People have been really giving us some positive feedback about the ability to pinpoint and identify root cause analysis, specifically when an error goes wrong, being able to get right to where that error is. Really changes from doing days or weeks of research down to just a few minutes. So I'll demonstrate a number of those things for you today. Now that's what QUBEdocs is. I've got one more slide here on who normally uses QUBEdocs. To be honest, the people I tend to talk to the most, specifically around QUBEdocs, it tends to be the TM1 consultants themselves. They're often engaged in delivering managed service supports on managed service contracts. I would say a large number of clients actually have their model supported by consultants themselves. There's also a lot of health checks, so oftentimes consultants will go in and do health checks to make sure that models are operating correctly, that they're actually generating the data that you would expect, as well as delivering consulting engagements. That would be your typical design, build, deliver TM1 models and the reporting assets that sit on top of them. We also have users in finance, usually finance analysts and sometimes managers and executives. The engineers themselves that may work for you or also in a consultancy. And then, of course, in support we have the IT help desk will oftentimes need to use QUBEdocs to understand a support ticket that has come in. So, with no further ado, that's what QUBEdocs is and some of the people who typically use it. And let's get started with the demo. So I start all my demos right from my website. I do it for a number of reasons, but the main reason is not only can you get to learn about the product itself, you can schedule a demo here, you can look at some support information and how to install it and how to use it, but you can also log right into QUBEdocs Cloud from the website. So I was already logged in, so I'm going to go ahead and log off just so I can demonstrate that. So you can log in, you'll come right up to the login screen. And I'm going to go ahead and log into my demo account. Now when you first log in, you're going to see, we try to keep the user experience, clean. So you only see a few things here when you first start. You see the All Models tab, you'll see the All Snapshots tab. These are all the snapshots of the various models that we have. And any users that we have, just one for this model. For this account. Now, each one of these tiles represents a particular model. We'll be doing most of our work in QDev and QDprod, but I have a few other models that I've documented here as well. And so let's go ahead and get started. So if I want to look at a copy of documentation, otherwise known as a snapshot, we just click on the blue button, and this is going to show us the most recent snapshot. You can schedule these snapshots so they run daily, or you can run them manually if you like as well. Now, the first thing you notice when you load a copy of documentation is oftentimes is that there's some icons up here at the top that show you how many objects you have, how many cubes and dimensions, which is pretty straightforward. But it also shows you, oftentimes this is like the very first time someone gets to see what their model looks like. This is actually an accurate representation of how the cubes flow together. We have a couple of different views that you can look at. This is the summary flows. I tend to look at the rule and process flows when I'm looking at these diagrams. Now, when you're looking at this diagram here, it's showing you kind of the whole model, but what it's not showing you are the control cubes. There is a lot of technical stuff that happens behind the scenes with TM1 models that many of you probably know. And so the control objects you can see on the diagrams anytime you want. You can just turn them on, and then you see the diagrams start to get a lot more verbose, right? Anytime you would like, you can also turn that off, and you can even customize these. In other words, I can go ahead and create a custom view of this diagram and just remove a few of these cubes and say, I really like this view without these cubes there. And then I can go ahead and save that so it shows up in my list of diagrams. I won't do that for this video here. Now, I mentioned to you that we can navigate through the diagram. So here I have a PL cube, so I could drill into the PL cube, and as soon as I drill into the PL cube, you'll notice that my icons up here change a little bit. Now I can see inside the model I had cubes, dimensions, processes, and chores, but inside the PL cube I have dimensions and I have documented rules, processes, and views. So you're always in context, and here in the diagram you'll also notice that the PL cube is in the center. We have a new object that is shown up here, which is the ODBC connection is starting to load the PL cube. And here you can also see that the PL detail cube is missing. It's red, which means it doesn't exist in this snapshot, but there is a pointer. Something is pointing to it, which is how we know it was there but isn't there anymore. And so you're starting to really get a little bit more detail even with that first click into the diagram itself. Now again, I prefer the rule and process flow diagram, and here when we're at the cube level, the rule and process flow diagram really starts to add a lot of detail. So we can see the ODBC connection flowing into the data flow through a TI process here. And we can see that data flowing into the PL cube. We can see the relationship of other data in the PL cube and also data flowing out of it. Now if we want to look at the TI process or the ETL script itself, we can click on that. And that ETL script is really what's loading all that data into the model. And we can now see all of the metadata updates that are coming out of it, how the data flows into it. We can review the process script itself, and we can even see the data source query. So just a really quick review of that. You have, from the top level, you can click on the PL cube, the rule and process flows, the TI script that's loading the data into the PL cube. You can review the process script and the data source query. In 4 or 5 clicks, you can go from the very top of the model all the way down to the bottom. And you can do that for any object in your entire model. You can do it for any cube, any dimension, any process, any chore, or any of the subordinate objects beneath them. Now you can also review all of your model objects by clicking on the left here. You can see the list of cubes, We give you the ability to put your own business description next to each of the objects, all of the dimensions, all of the processes, and all the chores. You can navigate right into a specific object right from here as well. In other words, I might want to look to see how the cost center dimension is loaded, and I can see here that the cost center dimension is loaded from these two TI processes, and it's being loaded from the database here, the FMIS database. And if I wanted to know specifically what's happening when that cost center dimension is being loaded, I can click on it into that TI process, and I can review the process script itself. Now, one of the other things that we can do here is that we've got a lot of data. We've got a lot of information about your model, right? And sometimes it can be a little daunting to try to figure out, how do I find something specific? There's so much stuff here. What if I can't see it on the top model page, right? So obviously we have a search engine. You can just search for it. So let's say you wanted to know not just if you had a dimension named fin year, but everywhere where fin year occurs in your model, right? So you literally can have a complete audit of any item of your model. Just type it into the search engine, and you can see here every cube rule. You can see everywhere in the feeders or the specific cube rule lines where it appears. Maybe you need to make a change to the fin year dimension, and you really want to understand everywhere it's located in your model. So let's take an example here. Imagine if you wanted to find something very specific in your model, but you also wanted to keep track of it. Maybe you wanted to know all of the TI processes that start with the word data and are loaded from an ODBC connection. So what you could do is you could go ahead and type in the word data, and you would find all of the places in your model where the word data shows up. All the cubes, the cube rules, the cube feeders, the cube views, etc. So there's a lot of places, but we're specifically interested just in the TI processes. So there's 135 listed here, but that doesn't really get us all the way down to what we really want to know. We want to know all the TI processes that start with the word data, but also that are loaded from an ODBC connection. So what we can do is we can click on Advanced Search, and we can build a specific search query. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to refine this to look just in processes, and in the subtype processes, we're going to look at the name and that it starts with the word data. So now we've refined our search results down to just 8 items. We can add another condition here to look at the data source type, that it contains word ODBC, and we'll make that an and now we have 2 results. Now the great thing about this is you can literally build a query for anything that you might be looking for in your entire model. And I mentioned earlier that this is oftentimes used for audits. Sometimes you're going to want to really keep track of certain types of processes or maybe dimensions, understanding if they've changed or not changed, etc. So what you can do is you can build the search inside a snapshot here like this, and we can go ahead and save it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this search that we've just defined. And I'll call it test, let's call it test 3. And then I'll say OK. So that search query has been saved, and it's accessible anytime I want right from my list. You can create your own sections. I've created demo sections here. We also have some best practices searches that come with the product, so right away. But here's our test 3 that we ran, and so that's delivers those 2 results. Now there's a few other things that you can do with search that are interesting that I'll try to show you here at the end. But one of the other features that we have is change analysis. Imagine if you had some changes in your model and you wanted to understand what happened last week as compared to this week. There's models are too big to be able to really track each individual item over time. So sometimes it's better to take a snapshot and say, don't show me everything, just show me what changed. So what we can do is we can go ahead and say QUBEdocs prod today, and how did it change from last week? And we can run a comparison. Now when we run this comparison, you can see right away we get a change summary. It pops right up and it says only 1% of the model changed from last week to this week. And you can drill right into that change, and here you can see only one change in one cube being modified, which was the KPI cube. And if we look at what specifically changed in the KPI cube, it was a change to a cube rule. And so when we drill that out, we can see that this content was removed. It was in there last week, but it's not in there this week. And you can see that there's been some changes to some of the description text as well. Now you can also change this baseline to compare the development environment, QD dev, to QD prod. And here you can see there's been a number of different changes. So for instance, we can look at the dimension changes and drill into that cost center dimension, and we can see that some different processes are updating that dimension in dev as opposed to prod. That seems normal probably, because your development environment is going to have different things that you're testing in there. And also, we can see changes down into the dimension subset level, and even subsets modified, the property, the baseline value, and the revised value. So you really have a deep level of detail that you can literally audit anything between any time period, and the snapshots are automated, and you can even audit them across different environments. We, at each snapshot level, we keep track of model statistics, the cube stats, how much memory they're using, dimension stats, number of elements, process stats, when they're kicking off and how long they're running for, etc. And there's a number of other features here that we're probably don't have enough time to get to in this, because I want to show you one more thing here. Now we talked a little bit about log file search and analysis. Log file search and analysis is really kind of the killer application for the support service, right? Understanding when something goes wrong, being able to quickly find out what went wrong, when it went wrong, what specifically caused it, is a really difficult job. So what we did was we built a log file search and analysis tool. I've already uploaded some logs, so I'm going to go ahead and analyze them now. Now what this tool does is looking at the TM1 server log, and this tracks all the communications between the client and the server. So as you can see here, I've got a bunch of data and kind of a chart here. This is showing me all of the messages, all the info messages, error messages, etc. So let's imagine I just wanted to see, we've been talking a lot about the ETL, how the data gets into the model and into the cubes. So maybe we just wanted to see all of the TI process errors that occurred in the previous week. So what I could do is I could go ahead and just click on the errors here, and I could filter in. So I am just looking at the errors from last week, and then I could also filter on TI processes. And this shows me all of the TI process errors just for the previous week, exactly when they occurred, how many there were, and I can even drill into the details here of the TI process errors. In this particular TI process error, I can drill into it. I can see the message in the log that occurred. I can see the specific TI process log that was spawned, and the message inside that process log. Now we're really at a low level of detail here, so it's really easy to get lost in all this detail. Like, how does that relate to the rest of the model? So when you're down at this level, what you can do is you can click View Surrounding Documents, and what this does is it allows you to see all of those messages again, not just the errors, but the information messages as well, and try to see where that error started or the cascades of errors started. And so you can see here I can even load a few more, and I've got an error here and an error here and an error here, and then I start to see the information messages. So you can kind of start to find from a timeline perspective when those errors occurred and kind of, possibly what was causing those errors to occur. Really drilling in or diving into kind of root cause analysis. Now, if we go back to that main page, the TM1 server activity page, there's another way to find information besides filtering. You got a lot of options for filtering, of course. You can audit, TI process errors or dimension errors or cube errors, etc. But one of the things that we can do is we can just go ahead and search. For instance, I might want to know all of the dimension changes in the previous week. So we could just type in the word changed, and I would, because it's a keyword in the log file, I immediately see all of the dimensions that changed last week. And here I can see that Michael changed a dimension, so I can go ahead and I can type in Michael's username, and I can get a full audit of everything that Michael has been up to in the system. All of the logins, all of the processes and chores and dimensions he changed, etc. Now, Michael has been complaining a little bit about the start time of the server being a little slow. So I can just type in the word start time and see what that brings up. And here you can see everywhere in the log files where start time occurred. Now we're just interested in the server start time, so I can combine the search with a filter. And now I get this really nicely formatted report that shows me when the server started up, when the session started, and how long. So I see 33 seconds, 34 seconds, 40 seconds, 32 seconds, but this 182 seconds is a little suspicious. So I can drill into that, and I can view the surrounding documents. I can load a few more up here at the top, and I can look to see what happened before that 182 second load time. And here we can see that Michael logged in, Michael, and a save data all. So possibly Michael logging in and running that save data all could have been part of what caused that slower load time for the server. Now, it's not for sure, but it's definitely giving you a lead on how to start to engineer out issues that are happening in performance issues that are happening in your TM1 models themselves. There's a number of other dashboards we have here in the log file analysis solution. So we also have a kind of a process history or TI process history health check. This process history health check kind of gives you the high level details. What's your longest running process? What's your most used process? How does that relate to the average? You can drill just into your process errors. You can see who's been running the most processes. You can even search this for a subset of processes that maybe started with the word load or had the word load in the title. You can also review a chore history dashboard, which has a lot of the same information as the process history dashboard. You can look at who's been logging in and how often and when by looking at the user activity login dashboard here. So you can start to get a profile of when people are logging in, how often. And then we have a user activity audit report. And this report really allows you to understand and audit a little bit more specifically particular users. So for instance, I might be just interested in what Michael has been up to in the system, so I can drill just into his activity. Again, I can see that on the chart up above, and then I can see the specific things that Michael has been doing. Again, there's that save data that he executed. Finally, we have a key metrics report. So the key metrics report itself, it really tries to wrap up all of this granular data into more of a high level number. How often has the server been restarting? How many user logins, dimension changes, chores executed, processes, etc. So as you might imagine, it's a lot of information. The goal of today's webinar was really to try to give you an overview of what QUBEdocs was and what it is, and how some of the ways that you might be able to use it. While it is a rather technical tool, it gets used an awful lot by folks in the business when the model isn't working the way they expect it to, and it really eases the conversation around how to sort out potential errors in the model or potential errors in the server, etc. When you're working with development teams or support teams. So with that, I'm going to turn my attention to some questions, if you'll just give me a moment here. It looks like we have our first question here. It asks, can we modify the documentation? The answer is yes and no. So we don't necessarily think it's a great idea for you to modify the as-built documentation. We go through a lot of trouble to make sure that we accurately represent the model. So the documentation as it exists here, you'll notice you've got the cubes and all of the flows between the cubes, all the different objects. If I scroll through, you'll see we kind of dynamically build all those diagrams. So if you start changing the diagrams, they might not necessarily represent what is built in your model. But one of the things that we have, we've gotten this question a lot, is we'd like to create our own end-user documentation, or we'd like to audit a specific object. So just recently, about in the last month, we have come out with a new demo feature. We're calling it the Document Wiki. I'm sorry, a beta feature. We're calling it the Document Wiki. And I'll go ahead and show you a little bit about how it works. It's kind of brand new, so hopefully a live demo of a beta feature won't break on us here. So the way it works is you've got some folders up here you can put your documents in, and down here we can create new documents. You can see here I've already created some. I've got some are templates, and some are drafts, and some are published. So I'll go ahead and create a new document right here. When I create the document, what you're going to see is kind of like a Word document editor, right? So we can go ahead and give it a name. I'll just call it Demo 2. And I've got some sample text up here that I usually use. Let me grab that. Okay, I'll paste that in. And here you can see I just pasted in some sample text. We can format things and make this a title. I can change the size, oops, sorry about that, size of this text. Let's make it 14. And then what I can do is I can start adding objects into, or embed objects into my documentation. So really the sky's the limit, right? End user documentation might say, here's how to maybe update the cost center dimension. So steps 1, 2, and 3, you might type those in there, add a numbered list. And then you would want to add in a picture of the diagram itself of the cost center dimension. So what I can do is I can click Embed. I don't know if you saw that there. I'll click Embed Diagram here. And then I'm going to choose a dimension diagram. And we're going to do it on QDProd. And I will choose the cost center dimension and Insert. And what you'll see here, we've created this little text here to pop it in. It says the diagram metadata flows has been embedded, and I can view what that's going to look like by clicking the preview button. And here you see that the cost center dimension is right here in the diagram, and it's loaded from these 2 TI processes, and the data comes from the ODBC. Now the interesting thing, the nice thing about this diagram, we call it a dynamic diagram, is because this diagram, if you click on any of these objects, you'll go right to the QUBEdocs documentation for the specific snapshot that this diagram is associated with. So it's a really nice way to pull in a visual representation of the things that you're trying to do end user training on. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a few more things. I'll click Save here, and you'll notice that I can do different versions. So I've got the versions here. So if I click Save, I'll start to get versions of the document itself. Let's go ahead and add in a dynamic search. So a dynamic search is basically any search that I've saved, and I can add it right into my whatever article or document that I'm creating. So let's embed a search. I could embed any of these searches that we have with QUBEdocs, but I'll do this one down here, which is called test data. I've used that before. And let's go ahead and do it based on QD-prod. And we'll do it based on the latest snapshot. So it'll always show us the latest snapshot results. And here it says test data. I can show you what it looks like. And there's our diagram and search results. And you'll notice these are dynamic, and they have code highlighting to show you specifically what I was looking for in my search. I was looking for TI processes that start with the word data and have a data source of ODBC. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and add a few more things. I'll go ahead and give that a quick save. And we can come down here. Let's add a change report. So a change report is really great if you're going to do maybe a migration or a bunch of work. Maybe you're going to do a health check and you want to kind of do the health check, see what the system looks like, and then snapshot it again and see what it looks like when you're finished performing the health check and cleaning up the model a little bit. So if I go ahead and embed a change, I'll click right here, embed change. And I'm going to choose to compare last week to this week, or a little date range here. And there we go. We got the comparison is embedded there, and I can show you what that looks like. Go ahead and click preview. And there's our diagram, there's our search results, and here is our change report. And you'll notice this looks just like the change report that you run in QUBEdocs proper. And it's dynamic, so you can drill right into the specific changes. Really handy for doing migrations, to be able to really understand specifically every single item that changed, where it changed, what location it changed, and what the specific change was. Let's see, and we'll add one more thing, maybe to just make sure this answer is complete. So here we have a dynamic checklist. One of the things that a dynamic checklist is really great for is it allows us to kind of give the visual reference to the health check. So let's go ahead and add a checklist. We'll click embed a checklist, and here we can say, again, we're going to do it on the current connection. And then what I'd like to do is I'll add all of the document quality items to check for, but some of them are not as high priority, so I'll change the priority of some of them. And then we've got a few here around naming conventions, so we'll just add 2 of these maybe. Okay. And then if you recall, we have a saved search, one that we created ourselves, so we'll just add that one as well. And then if I insert this and click the preview, excuse me, you'll notice that I've got the diagram, the search results here, I've got my change documentation, and I've now got a checklist with kind of a red light, green light, whether or not I've found any instances of that particular item. And here we've got some characters to avoid in view names. I have 8 instances. If I click right on those characters, I'll see specifically what character it is that I'm supposed to be avoiding, and I'll have a nice list popped up for me so that I can click off to the specific item, look at the diagrams, and we can clean that those things up in the model, and then save it, do a change report, and we have both a checklist and a nice change report for the work that we did. It's a great way to do health checks and model cleanups. All right, let me see if I can find another question here in the list. Okay, looks like we're getting close on time. I've got just one last question here related to what are all the things that we change or track in our model. So when we are doing documentation, we take a full snapshot of all the metadata, and then we store those in a database, and then we allow you to look to see if there are any changes. So for instance, if I wanted to see what changes there were in a particular model, I could click on change analysis, and I could say I want to look at QD-prod, and I could compare it this week to last week, and then I run comparison, and it'll return a result, and this particular comparison is going to say there's only 1% change. So if I click on that, I'm only going to see the changes that occurred. But what's a good way for us to kind of get a sense of all of the possible changes? So I have a little trick. I've got this model from IBM, which is called SmartCo. And I'm going to compare that SmartCo model to my QD-Prod model. The two models aren't similar hardly at all, but there is a couple of similarities, and I'll show you the similarities. So for instance, you can see now we have a lot of changes across the entire model because they're not the same model, of course. But if I click on the cubes and I get down here to the cubes that have changed, you'll notice that we both have a revenue cube. That's pretty typical. A lot of models have a cube called revenue. So by loading the revenue cube, I can see all of the different areas where I track changes. So I track changes to properties. You can see I track changes to cube rules, a lot of changes of course, because those rules aren't the same at all, to cube views, dimensions used in the cubes, etc. Even processes that write to the cubes, right? So none of this information is going to be the same because obviously they're completely different models, but this gives you a sense of all the different areas where we track changes in cubes. One of the places that people focus on quite a bit is looking at the dimension changes, specifically dimension attributes and elements. So let's say, for instance, we both share an account dimension, which again is a common dimension. Now these models aren't the same at all, so this should give you a good idea of all the different areas where we track changes. So we could look, for instance here, changes to dimension subsets. We could look at the subsets that were modified, and here we can see the property, the baseline, and the revised value. So we really get down to a very granular level across all of the areas of the model. So you can really kind of drill in specifically on what you're looking for to track the changes. But most importantly, you can be assured that when you run QUBEdocs, you're really getting that kind of complete audit. So I think we're almost out of time now here, and I guess if you have any extra questions, maybe just pop them in the chat and we'll get back to you in email, or you could potentially email the host. Thanks again for watching the webinar, and hope to talk to you soon about documenting your model. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that webinar on QUBEdocs. We have slides available here and descriptions of services we provide around doing documentation of your models, as well as performance evaluation. If you're having trouble or having some performance issues, obviously we can use QUBEdocs in a services perspective to help you identify the problems. And we do those types of things for as small a fee as $4,000. We've done some detailed documentation for folks. If you have any questions or would like us to evaluate your model, I can be reached at don.panji@lpa.com or 315-491-4721. We look forward to assisting with any project you have in these areas. Thank you very much.